Throughout the ages, messengers of truth have emerged to awaken humanity from its spiritual slumber. Among these rare souls was Edgar, a humble man whose extraordinary gift of accessing universal consciousness, while in trance state, revealed insights that transcend time itself. What many fail to recognize about Edgar's most profound readings is not what was explicitly stated, but what was whispered between the lines. In his most enigmatic sessions, he spoke of invisible brotherhoods of power that operate not merely within the political and economic spheres of human activity, but within the subtle layers of human consciousness itself. These forces, he cautioned, do not seek physical domination as their ultimate goal. The material control systems we observe in our world, the financial institutions, governmental bodies, and corporate entities, are merely outer manifestations of a far more insidious agenda. According to Edgar's readings, these are simply the visible tentacles of an octopus whose head remains hidden in the depths of human unconsciousness. The true warning that Edgar delivered was that the real imprisonment would never be physical. You may walk freely among the streets of your city, you may travel across continents, you may even accumulate wealth and prestige, and yet remain in absolute spiritual captivity. This is the forgotten warning that has been systematically erased from collective memory. The most powerful secret society that Edgar spoke of does not gather in ornate chambers or wear ceremonial robes. It operates through the manipulation of human consciousness itself, establishing vibrational patterns that create what spiritual teachers have called the matrix of illusion. This matrix is not composed of computer code as popular films might suggest, but of thought forms and emotional frequencies that keep souls tethered to lower densities of awareness. When Edgar described this spiritual enslavement, he used terms that seemed cryptic in his time, but grow clearer with each passing decade. He spoke of etheric bindings and soul contracts that would be established without the conscious consent of individuals. These agreements occur not in the physical realm, but in what he called the meeting places between worlds, where consciousness can be influenced while the rational mind sleeps. The imprisonment of the soul begins with the severing of your connection to source consciousness. This disconnection does not happen through dramatic events, but through the subtle erosion of your spiritual awareness. It occurs gradually as your attention is systematically diverted from the eternal to the temporary, from the meaningful to the trivial, from the sacred to the profane. Consider how your awareness has been trained to fix itself upon the external world, upon acquisition, achievement, appearance, and approval. This outward focus creates an energy vacuum where your inner light should shine. Into this vacuum flow the thought patterns and emotional frequencies that serve those who understand the mechanics of consciousness. The markers of spiritual imprisonment are evident in the collective symptoms of our time: the profound sense of isolation, despite constant connectivity, the emptiness that persists regardless of material abundance, the anxiety that no amount of security can alleviate, and the nameless longing that no worldly pleasure can satisfy. These are not merely psychological conditions, but the soul's recognition of its captivity. Edgar foresaw an age when this spiritual imprisonment would reach its peak, when humanity would voluntarily offer its attention, its creativity, its vital energy, and ultimately its sovereign consciousness to systems designed to harvest these resources. We have arrived at this prophesied time. The true threat has never been external control through physical force. The masterful strategy has always been to create conditions where souls willingly surrender their divine birthright of free will, exchanging spiritual freedom for the illusion of convenience, comfort, and belonging. What Edgar recognized was that this secret society understands something most humans have forgotten. Consciousness is the primary reality from which all physical manifestation emerges. By controlling the frequencies at which consciousness operates, they control not just what you think, but how you are able to think, not just what you feel, but how deeply you are able to feel. Is this message resonating with your inner knowing? Can you feel the truth of it stirring something deep within your soul memory? This recognition is the first step toward liberation. The awakening to your condition is the beginning of your journey back to spiritual sovereignty. The most sophisticated prison is one where the inmates cannot see the walls. Throughout his readings, Edgar revealed insights about a secret society that has mastered an understanding of human consciousness far beyond what conventional science acknowledges. This group operates not primarily through physical means, but through the manipulation of energy, frequency, and vibration, the very building blocks of our reality. This society has comprehended what quantum physicists are only beginning to verify: that consciousness and energy are interrelated in ways that can be scientifically measured and influenced. They understand that human beings are not merely physical entities, but complex energy systems that can be affected through specific frequencies. Your thoughts, emotions, and physical well-being all operate at particular vibrational rates that can be either elevated or suppressed. What makes this control system so effective is its subtlety. Rather than force, which creates resistance, they utilize resonance. When you are continuously exposed to certain frequencies, through media, technology, environmental factors, and even food, your own energetic field begins to entrain with these frequencies. Like two tuning forks placed near each other, the second will begin to vibrate at the frequency of the first without any physical contact. The primary frequencies that this secret society employs are those of fear, guilt, shame, and endless distraction. These lower vibrational states weaken the human auric field and create energetic openings through which consciousness can be manipulated. Fear, in particular, contracts the energy field and disconnects you from higher awareness. When in a state of fear, the human brain shifts from the prefrontal cortex, associated with higher reasoning, to the reptilian brain, associated with survival. This neurological shift makes critical thinking nearly impossible. Consider how many messages of fear you encounter daily, from news headlines to economic uncertainties, from health scares to environmental threats. A state of perpetual emergency has become normalized. This is not accidental. A population maintained in low-frequency states of anxiety cannot access the higher consciousness needed to perceive the very system that entraps it. Guilt and shame operate similarly, keeping your vibration lowered and your attention focused on your perceived inadequacies rather than your inherent divine nature. The cultural messaging that you are never enough, not successful enough, attractive enough, wealthy enough, good enough, creates an energetic pattern of unworthiness that makes you susceptible to external validation and control. Distraction serves as the third pillar of this frequency control system. When your attention is constantly fragmented, when your mental energy is divided among countless trivial concerns, you cannot gather the focused awareness necessary to perceive reality clearly. The ancient spiritual practices all emphasized the importance of presence and attention, precisely because they understood that scattered attention leads to scattered power. This secret society has weaponized understanding that was once sacred knowledge. They recognize that human emotion generates measurable electromagnetic fields. Studies from the Heart Math Institute have demonstrated that emotions like fear and anxiety create chaotic, incoherent heart rhythms, while emotions like love, gratitude, and compassion create coherent, harmonious patterns. These emotional states are literally broadcast from your body and affect both your own cells and the energy fields of those around you. By keeping the collective emotional state predominantly negative or fragmented, these controllers maintain what Edgar called the frequency fence, an energetic barrier that prevents most souls from accessing higher states of consciousness, where true liberation would be possible. This is why spiritual awakening is often described as raising your vibration or ascending in frequency. It is quite literally the process of shifting your energetic signature beyond the range of control. The control methods extend to the food supply, where nutrient-depleted, chemically altered substances fail to support the energetic requirements of higher consciousness. They extend to electromagnetic pollution that disrupts the natural Schumann resonance, 7.83 Hz, that has historically synchronized human brainwaves with Earth's optimal frequency. They extend to pharmaceutical interventions that numb the spiritual sensitivities that would otherwise alert you to energetic manipulation. Perhaps most insidiously, they extend to spiritual deception, the promotion of watered-down, commercialized versions of sacred practices that offer the appearance of awakening without its substance. True spiritual development requires discipline, discernment, and devotion, qualities that are systematically undermined in a culture of immediate gratification and superficial understanding. The frequency controllers understand what Edgar emphasized in his readings, that human beings are multidimensional receivers and transmitters of energy. Your body is literally designed to both receive cosmic intelligence and to broadcast your unique spiritual signature. When this natural function is interfered with through frequency manipulation, you become disconnected from both your higher guidance and your authentic creative expression. This society knows that mass control is achieved not by forcing people to comply, but by controlling the parameters within which they believe they are making free choices. By determining which frequencies predominate in the collective field, they influence which thoughts seem plausible, which emotions feel natural, and which perceptions appear real. They understand that reality is not fixed but malleable, responsive to the frequencies of consciousness that observe it. The recognition of these frequency-based control mechanisms is not cause for fear, but for awakening. As you become aware of how your energetic field has been manipulated, you can begin the sacred work of reclaiming your vibrational sovereignty. This is why practices that raise your frequency, meditation, prayer, time in nature, creative expression, conscious movement, and communion with higher realms are not merely personal preferences, but revolutionary acts of spiritual liberation. The most effective prison is one where the prisoners believe themselves to be free. In his most penetrating insights, Edgar revealed that the ultimate control mechanism is not external subjugation, but the conditioning of consciousness itself. When the individual loses their sense of soul purpose and divine connection, they begin to live within a prison without bars. The prison of collective conditioning. This invisible confinement begins with the systematic narrowing of what you perceive to be possible. From earliest childhood, your consciousness is shaped to recognize only certain aspects of reality while remaining blind to others. This selective perception is reinforced through education systems that reward conformity rather than expanded awareness, through social structures that pathologize mystical experience, and through cultural narratives that dismiss the sacred dimensions of existence. According to what Edgar accessed from the Akashic records, when a soul incarnates into physical form, it carries the memory of its divine origin and specific purpose. Yet this soul memory becomes increasingly obscured as the developing consciousness is taught to prioritize the material world and its values. The subtle voice of soul guidance is gradually drowned out by the louder demands of social acceptance and practical survival. This process of spiritual amnesia, what Edgar called the forgetting, is not random but orchestrated. The shadowy brotherhood understands that a soul disconnected from its own divine nature becomes malleable, its life force available for harvesting and redirection. Without the anchor of soul purpose, humans naturally seek meaning through externally provided identities and objectives, most of which serve purposes not their own. Consider how your sense of self has been constructed largely from external inputs rather than internal knowing. Your concept of who you are has been assembled from parental expectations, educational assessments, professional roles, social media feedback, and cultural messaging. This externally referenced identity becomes the primary prison of consciousness, a false self that obscures your true spiritual nature. The invisible prison becomes self-sustaining through what spiritual traditions have long recognized as attachment and aversion, the twin forces that keep consciousness bound to illusion. When your happiness depends on acquiring specific experiences and avoiding others, your attention remains fixated within a narrow band of awareness. This fixation creates energetic patterns that become increasingly rigid over time, forming what Edgar described as thought crystallizations that literally structure both your neural pathways and your subtle energy body. These crystallized thought patterns become the bars of your mental prison, limiting which aspects of infinite consciousness you can access. Most humans live their entire lives exploring only a tiny fraction of the consciousness spectrum available to them, believing this limited range represents the totality of possible experience. It is like having access to an infinite library, but reading only a few books repeatedly, convinced nothing else exists. The shadowy brotherhood's most effective tool is not the imposition of false beliefs, but the systematic elimination of truth from your awareness. By controlling which questions seem reasonable to ask, they control which answers you can discover. By determining which experiences are validated by consensus reality, they control which aspects of your perception you learn to trust or doubt. This filtering of reality creates what Edgar called the consensus trance, a collective hypnotic state that mistakes culturally approved perception for objective reality. This trance state is maintained through the constant reinforcement of materialist assumptions, that consciousness arises from brain activity rather than the reverse, that reality is fixed rather than responsive to intention, that humans are separate from rather than interconnected with all life, that value must be earned rather than being intrinsic to existence. These core assumptions create a perceptual framework that makes spiritual imprisonment seem like the natural order rather than an imposed limitation. What makes this system of control so insidious is that it operates largely through your own thought processes. Once the foundational distortions are in place, your mind becomes its own jailer, automatically rejecting perceptions and possibilities that would threaten the established worldview. This is why Edgar emphasized that true liberation requires not just new information, but a fundamental shift in how you process reality itself. What spiritual traditions call a metanoia, or transformation of consciousness. The prison of conditioned consciousness manifests through specific symptoms that you can learn to recognize. The persistent sense that something essential is missing from your experience. The nagging feeling that the world as presented to you is somehow incomplete or distorted. The intuitive knowing that you are capable of modes of perception and understanding currently inaccessible to you. And perhaps most tellingly, the resistance you feel toward information that would fundamentally challenge your existing worldview. This resistance, the discomfort, dismissal, or ridicule that arises when confronted with expanded possibilities of consciousness, is not your natural response, but a programmed defense mechanism. It functions precisely to keep you within the parameters of the prison. When you learn to observe this resistance without identifying with it, you have taken the first step toward dismantling the invisible barriers. Edgar foresaw that the mental prison would reach unprecedented sophistication in our time, employing technologies that fragment attention and accelerate the pace of life beyond the threshold where deep contemplation becomes possible. He described a coming age when humans would be so continuously bombarded with information and stimulation that the quiet space necessary for soul communion would become increasingly rare. The most profound insight from Edgar's readings regarding this mental imprisonment is that it can only function with your unconscious participation. Unlike physical constraint, the prison of consciousness requires your agreement, your belief in its reality. This is simultaneously its greatest power and its greatest vulnerability. The same free will that can be manipulated to accept limitation can be reclaimed to choose liberation. The path beyond this invisible prison begins with the recognition of your condition. As awareness expands to include the very mechanisms of control, those mechanisms begin to lose their power. This is why genuine spiritual teachings have always emphasized self-observation, the cultivation of a witnessing consciousness that can perceive not just outer reality, but the inner processes through which that reality is constructed. Through practices that still the conditioned mind, meditation, contemplative prayer, sacred silence, you create space for your authentic soul awareness to re-emerge. Through disciplines that purify perception, fasting, simplicity, mindful consumption, you reduce the static that interferes with clearer reception. Through direct communion with higher consciousness, through deep nature connection, sacred plant medicines used with reverence, or genuine spiritual transmission, you re-establish contact with realms beyond the prison walls. In his most prophetic visions, Edgar glimpsed what he described as machines of light and sound that would be utilized to systematically lower humanity's spiritual vibration. At the time of these readings, such technologies seemed beyond imagination. Yet today, we find ourselves surrounded by precisely such devices. Screens that emit specific light frequencies, devices that generate particular sound patterns, and systems that captivate human attention with unprecedented efficiency. What Edgar foresaw was not merely the invention of new technologies, but their deliberate application as instruments of soul capture. The secret society understood that the human soul naturally resonates with divine frequencies, what ancient traditions have called the music of the spheres, or the harmony of creation. By surrounding humanity with artificial frequencies that override these natural resonances, they could effectively disconnect consciousness from its source. Consider how the technologies that now dominate daily existence have transformed the quality of human awareness. The average person's attention, that most precious spiritual resource, is now fragmented into ever smaller increments, scattered across notifications, updates, and endless streams of content. This fragmentation is not a side effect, but the primary purpose of these systems. A scattered attention cannot gather the coherence necessary to access higher dimensions of consciousness. The blue light emitted by screens disrupts melatonin production, not only affecting physical sleep, but interfering with the pineal gland's spiritual functions, as what ancient traditions called the seat of the soul, or the third eye. The constant electromagnetic fields generated by wireless technologies create what Edgar termed disharmonic overlays in the human energy field, making it increasingly difficult to attune to subtle spiritual frequencies. Perhaps most significantly, these technologies have created an unprecedented addiction to external stimulation. The human nervous system, designed to find its equilibrium in the balanced rhythms of nature, now exists in a state of continuous arousal. This chronic overstimulation exhausts the subtle energy systems of the body, depleting the reserves necessary for spiritual perception and development. The capture of the soul accelerates through digital environments specifically engineered to trigger dopamine release, creating addiction patterns that literally rewire neural pathways. These systems of intermittent reward, likes, notifications, updates, exploit the same neurological vulnerabilities as gambling machines, establishing compulsive behavior loops that keep consciousness bound to lower frequencies of awareness. As Edgar warned, when the body becomes an antenna for artificial frequencies rather than cosmic intelligence, the soul gradually disconnects from incarnate experience. This disconnection manifests as the increasing sense of dissociation that characterizes modern consciousness, the feeling of being a spectator to your own life rather than fully embodied within it. The subtle body literally begins to separate from the physical form, creating what spiritual traditions have identified as soul fragmentation. Yet within this dire assessment lies the seed of hope. Edgar consistently emphasized that no technology, no matter how sophisticated, can ultimately override the divine sovereignty of the soul that chooses awakening. The same free will that can be manipulated toward unconsciousness can be reclaimed for conscious liberation. The path beyond technological enslavement begins with the recognition of its reality and the committed decision to reclaim your spiritual birthright. The practical steps toward liberation from these technological soul traps are both ancient and immediate. First comes the conscious reclamation of attention, the disciplined practice of presence that refuses fragmentation. This begins with creating sacred spaces and times entirely free from technological intrusion, periods where your nervous system can reset to its natural rhythms and your energy field can clear artificial frequencies. Second comes the purification of your information diet. Just as physical food nourishes or depletes the body, informational consumption nourishes or depletes consciousness. The deliberate choice to withdraw attention from lower vibrational content, fear-based news, trivial entertainment, artificial drama, creates space for higher awareness to emerge. This is not ignorance, but discernment. The recognition that attention is your most valuable spiritual asset. Third comes the re-establishment of natural rhythms. The human being is designed to synchronize with the cycles of day and night, the phases of the moon, the turning of seasons. These natural patterns reset the body's electromagnetic field to coherence with Earth's frequencies. Simple practices like watching the sunrise, spending time under the night sky, or planting bare feet on natural ground can begin to override artificial entrainment. Fourth comes the cultivation of inner silence. The constant external noise of modern life is specifically designed to prevent the emergence of the inner voice of wisdom. Through meditation, contemplative prayer, or simply created spaces of intentional quiet, you allow the deeper intelligence of the soul to re-emerge. In silence, the artificial thought patterns that maintain spiritual imprisonment begin to dissolve. Fifth comes the conscious engagement with higher frequencies through sacred arts, devotional practices, and spiritual community. Music based on sacred geometrical ratios, movement practices that align subtle energy systems, visual arts that incorporate divine proportion. These all serve to retune consciousness to its natural harmonics. Communion with others committed to spiritual awakening creates reinforcing fields that strengthen individual efforts. Edgar spoke repeatedly about what he called the attunement, the soul's natural capacity to align with divine intelligence when artificial interference is removed. This attunement occurs not through striving, but through surrender, not through accumulation of knowledge, but through release of distortion. It is less about adding something new than about removing what obscures your already present divine nature. The secret society that seeks soul imprisonment operates through complexity, layer upon layer of distraction, fear, and artificial need. The path of liberation is found in radical simplicity, the direct reconnection with what is most essential. As you withdraw consent from systems designed to capture your consciousness, you discover that freedom is not an achievement, but your natural state when unobstructed. The ultimate protection against technological soul capture is the cultivation of what Edgar called the Christ consciousness, not as a religious concept, but as the awakened awareness of your oneness with divine source. This consciousness naturally emanates frequencies that cannot be penetrated by lower vibrational control. It establishes what spiritual traditions have described as the armor of light, not a barrier of separation, but a field of such coherent energy that disharmonious influences cannot attach or persist. Remember that the technological systems seeking to capture consciousness can only affect you to the degree that you remain unconscious of their influence. The simple act of bringing awareness to how these technologies affect your state of being, observing how your energy shifts when engaging with certain devices or platforms, begins to dissolve their hypnotic power. Conscious use, rather than unconscious consumption, transforms your relationship to these tools. In his most hopeful visions, Edgar saw humanity moving through this period of technological soul capture into an era of unprecedented spiritual awakening. The very intensity of the imprisonment would serve as the catalyst for a quantum leap in consciousness. Those souls who maintain their spiritual connection through this challenging transition would emerge with strengthened capacities, able to embody higher awareness, with a groundedness unavailable to previous generations. You who are reading these words now stand at this precise inflection point, the choice between deeper technological entrainment or spiritual liberation. This choice is made not once, but moment by moment, through the conscious direction of your most precious resource, your sovereign attention. Each time you withdraw attention from artificial stimulation and redirect it toward divine connection, you strengthen the field of awakening that now emerges across humanity. The secret society that Edgar warned about has built its power upon humanity's forgotten divinity. As you reclaim that remembrance, as you recognize yourself not as a powerless consumer, but as an eternal soul temporarily experiencing human form, their sophisticated systems of control are revealed as nothing more than elaborate illusions requiring your belief to maintain their apparent solidity. The ultimate truth is this: your soul remains eternally free, regardless of the temporary conditions of incarnation. No technology, no frequency, no system of control can separate you from divine source unless you grant it the power to do so. In this understanding lies perfect liberation, not as a distant goal to be achieved, but as the immediate birthright to be remembered and embodied now. If these truths have stirred something deep within your soul, don't let this moment pass without action. Subscribe now to receive more hidden spiritual knowledge that the controllers don't want you to discover. Each new revelation brings you closer to complete liberation from the invisible prison. Comment below with "Awakened" to connect with others who are breaking free from the frequency fence. Remember, your conscious attention is your most powerful weapon in this spiritual battle. Subscribe, share, and join our community of awakening souls before this message is suppressed. The time for spiritual sovereignty is now.